out as they're coming in. You're all very, very welcome indeed to what is the third VEEP webinar on open dialogue, communities and mental health. And for those of you who know us, you'll know that this is part of a North-South partnership between the Community Development and Health Network and Community Work Ireland and their Community Development Mental Health Network. The whole purpose of the project has been to connect community workers, people who work in mental health and people who are expert by experiences, to connect us together so that we can discuss the really important issue of mental health and poverty and how we're responding to that as a sector. So it's all about the sharing of the learning and the insights and the experience. As I say, today's format is going to be slightly different because we are expecting, well over 50 participants. Liam MacGabhan and colleagues there. Liam is going to lead the webinar. We won't be doing our usual breakout rooms. We've changed that up a little bit. So watch this space. And the other thing that I just wanted to say is that because we're conscious of technology letting us down at any minute, and we've got a lot to get through, I'm just going to ask people if they wouldn't mind to introduce themselves using the chat this time, if that's okay. So without further ado, I'm going to pass you over to Liam. Thanks, Liam.
Thanks, Joanne. Hi, folks. Welcome. I hope you are cozy wherever you are in the country. My name is Liam MacGabhan from the Dublin North Northeast Recovery College. And hopefully between the four of us, we're going to end up moving into the last 45 minutes today, actively participating in an open dialogue forum. Some of you, because I know some of you have been involved at some stage in open dialogue forums before. Some of you I haven't met before, and looking forward to meeting you and to connecting with you today. With the change in format, how we thought we would do it is, rather than having loads of interaction the whole way through, we would give four very brief breakdowns, and you'll see it in the first, you saw it kind of on the agenda, but you'll also see it, hopefully you're seeing one slide there. Is that right, Sabine? Give me the nod. One slide. Okay. So you'll see the four pieces there that we're going to unfold over the first hour. And then we're going to take a comfort break, if that's okay, for about 10 or 12 minutes. So it'll be quick comfort. And then we're going to invite everybody to be involved in a open dialogue known as Trialogue, or in this case, possibly Polylogue, because we're not sure where people are coming from. We'll describe those words as we go along. And we hope by the time we get there, you'll have an idea about what we're trying to achieve in the last 45 minutes. That final dialogue will be specifically around poverty and mental health, which the project that Joanne's already introduced is about, North-South. And also in that, because we're online, we're inviting people to also use the chat to interact on the chat, as well as interact verbally when we get to that last part. There may be time, depending on how we go, for a little bit of questions on one or two of the presentations, but that will depend on how we're doing. We're going to try and be pretty tight with time as we go. So I'm already 3 minutes behind. So hopefully I've given enough of introduction already, and I'm just going to kick into my part of I suppose my part is an introduction to open dialogue as a methodology generally for community development. And it's a methodology for lots of things, for research, for community forum. And what we found in particular over the last 15 or so years, that is a perfect methodology for community development at various levels. And you're going to see those different levels presented over the course of the four presentations. And what I'm really doing is to just hopefully just give a kind of an overview. So a lot of people say we do open dialogue. We're great. We have lots of people in the room. We have these dialogues. Blah 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 blah. They don't have open dialogue. They have situations set up where people are able to express their opinions. They have situations set up where we hear from people with lived experience, maybe from a family, maybe from a profession, but they don't necessarily set up a dialogical space. So hopefully, kind of Bachton's kind of notion there is it's where we almost occupy a mutual world where we co-construct a new reality, where we engage in some sort of collective conscious building, collective dialogue between us. Although we don't give up our individual opinions or individual values, we come into a shared value development. We come into a shared development of a joint expertise within the world that we come into. Be that two people coming together or be that 100 people coming together. That's what open dialogue in terms of pure communication is about. You'll see there a little bit, it's about subject to subject. So it's very much about creating a circle, very much about creating a flattened hierarchical structure. It definitely doesn't objectify. It's always a we rather than an I. And it's always about co-creating the particular world or around the particular topic we're talking about within the process. Um, I suppose some of the key aspects of the theory in action is very much a practical way of being. And that's what people describe it as, a way of being, a process, a rather than something that's applied. It's not an applied anything. It's a way of being in communication with other people. And it addresses some of these things that you can already see there, the power dynamics, empowerment. It can take on multiple truths. So anybody who thinks there is one truth in relation to any given thing will struggle with open dialogue. And people do struggle with open dialogue, and it's not for everybody because it encompasses and takes on board whatever truths people are bringing to the table around any particular issue. It is about constructing, it is about transforming the status quo, transforming the system, not necessarily through the action within the group itself. The thinking changes, the dialogue changes, and a new reality changes. And thereafter, people take that into action. And that's where the transformation takes place outside of the open dialogue space itself. It is about the collective, about the we, not about the I. And there's no hierarchical knowledge base or expertise having any perceived value over the other. All expertise in all of the people in the room is equally valued. Um, a few of the things that's involved, it's definitely the creation of a participatory process. And you're going to see that in a minute, this participatory process in action at a local level, then at an international level, and then at a community level in itself. But it's also been used for organizational community development, where the methodology is applied to almost create a situation in hierarchical systems usually where it's no longer hierarchical, and to see can that cause a transformation in place. I'll give a very quick example of that now in a minute. It's using community for Trialogue, which Bernard's going to talk about, for consensus building, which will come into Trina's uh, presentation, and for system transformation, which will be quite relevant in Sabine's presentation. So we've tried to bring examples to this webinar that really mimics what open dialogue is about, and hopefully you'll see that at the end. You did have a paper shared by Eleanor, and that paper, the reason we shared that paper was it gathers together quite a lot of the backlog of how, in particular, Trialogue, but also open dialogue as a methodology has been used, because we're only going to showcase a few of them here. So just to get a sense of the characteristics of open dialogue processes engagement. I'm not going to read all these out, just going to ask you to try and internalize them as they come up on the screen. You can see the collectivity coming out. You can see the idea of everybody's opinion. You can see the idea of consensus building coming up there. Now, that's not to say that you'll get 100 people coming to some sort of consensus. Where you get the consensus in is how decisions will be made, and on the basis that all voices have been heard and how those voices will be represented. What's really useful in open dialogue is it's very good at being able to accommodate a lot of disagreement, a lot of conflict, in particular because within the topics, within the open dialogues themselves, the facilitated process doesn't allow for personalization. So it allows for your experience, what you wish for, which means you can really disagree with other people without them feeling attacked, without them feeling that you're about getting them, as opposed to the issue at hand in itself. There's nothing necessary I'm going to pull out of there. I'm just going to move forward a little bit more. The terms of relationship in Trialogue, again, I've put them in there, and this is in advance of Bernard's presentation, who will kind of give a brief kind of intro to it afterwards. But you can see here where the participants themselves, you might get an initial topic that's thrown in, but the participants generate the overall topic that's going to be discussed. So even if it's in a research or if it's in a movement in the community development methodology, once it goes into the dialogical space, it's over to them. So there's no controlling it after that. It becomes a collective kind of unfolding of dialogue, which can be quite for some people. There's three things sometimes happen. There's a little bit of fear of giving into the unknown, giving into uncertainty. There's often a little bit of fear about giving over your power to the power of the collective. And thirdly, a lot of people who really focus on their expertise as giving them some sort of status in their communities, to give over that expertise as being no better than anybody else is quite challenging. But once you do all those three things, it becomes a really, really empowering space to be in for whoever you are. So the history of open dialogue as a methodology in Ireland, I'll do this very, very quickly. It was first brought into Ireland in 2006 as an attempt to implement a vision for change, which was our mental health policy. Chapter 3 was about nothing about us without us, where it was a case of how the hell are we going to be able to hand over some of the power to what they were called then service users and family members in terms of designing, developing, and implementing our mental health policy. It was never done before, and nobody knew how to do it. So a gang of people who had some sort of notions of how to do it brought in open dialogue as a way of informing the organizational change in a leadership program. Very basically, you had a person with lived experience, a family member, and a professional would come together as a leadership team, and they would be responsible for changing a local mental health service. There was 189 participants across 16 counties in Ireland, and there was 63 service improvements over 10 years. Not all of them were sustained, but many of them were sustained and also grew and grew and grew into much more bigger things. So, for example, several of those service improvements was about creating trilogues or creating open dialogue mental health teams. In both cases, they were successful. We had open dialogue in 3 counties around Ireland. Unfortunately, it's gone back down to 2. One was closed in West Cork, but that was birthed out of the initial organisational development programme. Trialogue is still alive and well in a number of places, and Bernard will talk about that more now. Trialogue is literally the bringing together of people with lived experience or living experience, family members, and professionals involved in delivery of care, and anybody who's particularly interested in mental health in the community. And that was birthed out of the initial policy implementation, where people there said, can we not have this kind of liberation in the community itself? Can it not be separate from services, please? So we set up 11 of them. And you'll see, for example, in research, we evaluated, 7 of them. We evaluated those in 2011, and many of them have continued, and more of them have grown since 2011 and continue to this day. Just moving into research as a methodology, one of the key areas where it was used as a methodology was a big piece of research in North Dublin that has actually had a major influence on our national programme of our dual diagnosis nationally, and has also influenced several other programmes and pieces of research community development around the country. For example, the next one in here that Triona is going to talk about in a couple of minutes, and the next one here that Sabine is going to talk in a couple of minutes. So it has quite a lot of substantive kind of ground within an Irish context in terms of research, in terms of community development. And as I said, the paper Eleanor already shared gives you some of the other indications where stuff has been published on the methodology. I'm already, I think, gone into, yes, I'm gone over. So I'm going to stop sharing now and I'm going to pass over to Triona.
Thanks, Liam. I'm just going to share my screen. Liam, if you could just give me a thumbs up and let me know, is that showing for you at the first page of, yeah, perfect. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Triona. I am the Recovery Community Development Officer with the Recovery Academy of Ireland at the moment. That's my current role. The Recovery Academy is an organisation that's all about kind of promoting the visibility of recovery from addiction and mental health across Ireland. So, but in my previous role, I was with the Recovery College, the Dublin North Northeast Recovery College with Liam. And the project that I'm going to speak about today was a project that we were working on from September 2022 to July of 2023. So I'm just going to give a bit of an overview of the project itself and how we use the open dialogue methodology in trying to achieve the outcomes that we set out. So the project was called Capacity Building, a Community Response to Dual Diagnosis in the North Inner City. This project was, sorry, I'm trying to move slides and it's not, here we go. So the project was around developing a community response to mental health and substance use issues in the Dublin North East Inner City area. And just to give a bit of context around the area itself. So it's defined as an area with high levels of deprivation and poverty, coming from a multitude of issues. And in 2017, the Mulvey report was published, and it set out a list of recommendations around what kind of needed to happen in the area to make the area, I suppose, a better place for people to live in. Our particular project was set up as a result of some of those recommendations. The piece that we took on in 2022 was actually a follow-on from an earlier piece that was more concerned with, I suppose, building capacity within professionals around trauma-informed communities and dual diagnosis, so how to work with dual diagnosis. The key recommendations that came out of the Mulvey report that we were kind of tasked with trying to achieve would have been to, I suppose, get the community to collectively work together and operate as if in a hub. So to get the statutory, the voluntary services, the community services to start working together a bit more effectively, the communities and the providers to know what's actually available for people if presenting with mental health and or addiction, substance use issues, how to access the services more effectively, so referral processes, and to focus on a strengths-based approach, which is preventative and based on evidence of what is already working. We wanted to get the services to come together and, I suppose, make sure that there would be easy transitions for people between services, because although there is a huge amount of amazing work going on in the North East Inner City and great services doing great things, the transition between services wasn't as smooth as they would have hoped for it to be. So people were falling through the cracks. So that was one of our desired outcomes from this project. So in September of 2022, the community development team was set up. The partners were the Dublin North Northeast Recovery College and the Recovery Academy of Ireland. So we were both leading out. I was the coordinator of the project, so I probably took more of an active role at that time. And I kind of seen my role as building the connections and the relationships with the community, the services and the community members themselves. 11 months for a project is a short time to get this done, but we kind of hit the ground fast and started straight away into September. The desired outcomes for the project. So this is what we actually were kind of assigned with doing. So try to promote the idea of a no wrong door policy for people experiencing dual diagnosis, to come up with a joined up integrated community response to dual diagnosis, and to create a network of professionals and community members that were tasked with the future of the project and you know, keeping it sustainable as well. To improve the links with specialist mental health services and overall to keep promoting that trauma-informed community approach through regular and follow-up training. We identified the stakeholders at the start of the project. We mapped out the area, we mapped out the services that were working with mental health and substance use. We brought it right back to kind of early years prevention. That's kind of where we saw the whole thing starting. So we actually met with a lot of like childcare services and youth clubs. We met with community members. We identified kind of service users, family members. Of course, the community services, we linked in with as many as we possibly could, tried to build those relationships. And then we also reached out to the statutory services that were there in the area. Part of, I suppose, our whole aim was that we would kind of remove those silos between the mental health world and the addiction and substance use. So any resistance, we were trying to maybe kind of give people the opportunity to come together and see the different perspectives. The Department of Health and the HSC were obviously big players in it as well, because they would deliver services in the area. Law enforcement, so the local Garda stations, the community police officers as well, they were invited to be involved. And then, of course, the politicians as well, because we've seen that we had a role in kind of, I suppose, advocating and lobbying for you know, the dual diagnosis to have a little bit more funding in the area so that the community services and what they were looking for could be funded consistently. So the action plan. So how we wanted to kind of go about achieving this was we identified the open dialogue as a methodology that could be used to kind of achieve the outcomes that we set out. So we established the forum almost immediately. I think we had our first forum in the October of 2022. The community forum was to provide a space for action-orientated activities. So we didn't want it just to be a talk and shop. The idea was that actions would grow from the space. We wanted to establish rules of engagement between stakeholders. So kind of like what Liam was mentioning, just the rules around the open dialogue and what we actually wanted to set out to achieve, which we came up with along with the community. We wanted to explore existing capacity. So what was already there, the assets-based approach. So what is already there, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. What can we kind of come up with collectively to, you know, enhance what's already there? That was identified pretty early on from speaking to people and understanding how much there actually was already in the area. And then ultimately to identify a potential integrated care pathway within the community for people. So how we were going to go about this was initially building relationships. So this is an area that's kind of been very fractured over the years. It's a highly funded area. There's a lot of funding goes into the North Inner City, which means there's a lot of pilot programs. So early on in my role, I understood that, you know, this is an area that's used to people coming in and delivering projects, short projects. And I was very aware that 11 months is a short-term project in terms of community development. So I saw it as quite important to be able to go out and build the relationships with the stakeholders as much as possible. Hard to do it with the community members because I didn't have a direct link. So it meant meeting with all of the different kind of community organizations, building trust with them. And as a result of that, then them kind of passing on the information to the community members. And then the dialogical engagement. So the open dialogue piece, that was kind of what we seen as our vehicle for the actual change to happen and for the actions to be explored. So why open dialogue? So a community worker's role is to assist, enable and facilitate groups of people or community members to build relationships, develop analysis and work together to address issues impacting on their lives. So we've seen the open dialogue as the opportunity to create a neutral space for people. So people from very varying different backgrounds. So we had professionals, community members, people with lived experience, family members with lived experience. We asked that people came with openness. So we wanted people to kind of come in and leave their hat at the door, as Liam mentioned. It wasn't always the case because naturally when someone speaks about their experience, it can be quite, you know, apparent where they're coming from, what their background is. But we just asked for an openness, you know, in order to kind of allow that shift in views. Connection was a huge piece for us as well. So the community was quite disconnected. So we wanted to at least create a space where people could come together and build those connections, past connections, build them back up again, new connections. There was a high turnover of staff in the area, something we seen from the very beginning. So we wanted to kind of bring everybody into the fold. and kind of forge those new relationships. Differences in the group could be shared, understood, and respected. And from this, I suppose, we've seen kind of solidarity come together. Everybody was there for the same reason. Everybody kind of wanted that joined up response to dual diagnosis. The open dialogue also kind of showed that there was a commitment to something bigger. So everybody was working in their own respective areas. Like I said, amazing work going on, but something bigger was required in order to kind of plug those gaps for people who were experiencing dual diagnosis. Like all projects, the funder generally sets the overall agenda as a result usually of research, and the community workers employed to achieve the set outcomes. But coming from a community development background, we felt it was nothing for us without us. So from the very beginning, we made sure the community was involved as much as possible with the set of outcomes, what we wanted the deliverables to be and what we wanted them to look like. So the dialogue space made sure that the community voice was central to the whole project. And we continuously evaluate the project as it was moving along, just to make sure that we were keeping on track for nothing for us without us. It created a bottom-up approach rather than a top-down approach. So everything that the emerging teams that came out of the open dialogue went into what the resulted recommendations were from the project. The dialogue space encouraged people to question their own thoughts and beliefs, creating a consciousness within the group. Of course, there was resistance from people. People were coming from different backgrounds, and dual diagnosis, mental health and addiction had their own personal experiences, or new people. So it was quite an emotive topic to talk about. But I do believe in the open dialogue setting, people were very, very respectful, and very open to taking on different opinions as well. Coming from a community development background myself, Frere would be someone that I would take on a lot of the Frere theories and try and put them into practice in my work as much as possible. And I've seen the open dialogue. Obviously, Liam has facilitated it for many years, but this was a whole new kind of practice for me. But I did, from the very first dialogue space, it was quite obvious that this was going to be kind of powerful and really could offer that transformation in the community that we were looking for. Frere would say that dialogue can be a catalyst for social and structural transformation. 11 months is a short period to try and achieve these things. So I think we were on the way to achieving this had the project gone on a bit longer, and that we could have continued on with the open dialogue spaces. However, in saying that, in the 11 months, there was a transformation, and it was quite apparent to the community development team. The dialogue creates critical and transformational space. So some of the conversations that came up, we always went in with a couple of open topics, as Lee mentioned before. So we would have a couple of open topics to talk about. And it was important to keep to the topics. As the project was moving along and we had deliverables in place that we had to achieve, I think we had to kind of, I suppose, hone in on those topics a little bit more and become a bit more action-based. With the first couple of dialogues, we did use them as spaces for people to share their views and their perspectives on dual diagnosis, and to kind of, just have that open conversation. It was relationship building between the community as well. So it was important to keep the space for that. Of the context of the area as well. So it was important this whole project is around mental health and poverty, and it was important to recognise that the area itself has high levels of poverty and the policies that have affected the area over the years. So we weren't taking dual diagnosis as an isolated piece. It was in or around, I suppose, what policies maybe affected the impact of dual diagnosis in the area. So we kind of got to really explore the history and where the causes of dual diagnosis. The open dialogue space encouraged mutual critical questioning. So we had varying different backgrounds in the group, coming from all different perspectives, and people had questions of each other. As much as they left their hat at the door, we had community services in the space and we had statutory services in the space. So naturally there was that question of each other, which created a space for more understanding between the community members. So overall, we had 6 open dialogue sessions across the 11 months. We had 182 attendees in total. We had around 8 at the first meeting, so a very small number. And I think it was really important that we were able to build trust with those 8, and through building that trust, word spread that the open dialogue space was a safe space to come to. And as a result of that, the numbers grew to 40 to 50 attendees at the last 2 meetings. We used accessible community spaces, so we moved the open dialogue across different venues in the North Inner City. It can be kind of a territorial area. There's a lot of, it's small, though it's small geographically, it can be territorial. So we made sure to kind of make sure we moved the open dialogue spaces and we weren't favouring one area over another. We ensured that there was time for refreshments and informal conversations. So at the start, we would have, roughly around half an hour for people to come in and, meet each other and network, get to know each other. And then again, at the end of the session, we created that space as well. Obviously, stuff was explored during the open dialogue that people wanted to, continue on those conversations after. So we felt that was really important. We also built optional wellbeing sessions, wellbeing sessions into the open dialogue. So we had one where we had yoga delivered at the start. We were recognizing that the content of the open dialogue was quite emotive and heavy, could be heavy. So we made sure that we wanted to practice what we preached, I suppose, and make sure that people were feeling kind of that they could ground themselves before and after the sessions. We raised awareness of the forums through outreach, networking, and social media. So initially, we probably expected a lot more to come to the first meeting. And because we didn't have, we had to kind of rejig and get back to basics on how were we actually going to reach the community members. And this was just through relationship building and getting the word out there. That was our main kind of avenue. Networking through emails, local community groups, and then social media. So sharing our posts on social media as well. So what were the outcomes of the overall project and using the open dialogue as our main methodology? So we created an informal community of practice amongst the community. The community themselves designed what they thought an integrated care pathway for people who are experiencing dual diagnosis should look like. The community and the statutory services engaged in conversation, which enabled mutual understanding for different perspectives. And there was a commitment and agreement that was achieved across the community through the sharing of their experiences. We raised awareness for services and supports that are on offer, which otherwise may have remained siloed. That's something that I'm still working in the local area. So as a result of the project for the 11 months, people will say that they didn't know certain services existed, which may have only been down the road from them. So something as simple as just people being more aware of what's actually on offer in the community and collaborations being built through that as well.
I think we're
So
just
this was
coming
a
up,
piece.
Triona.
This was a piece, thanks, Liam. This was a piece that we had an artist come and I suppose capture what was spoken about at one of our open dialogue sessions. So you can see there was quite a lot there. And we thought it was just a lovely way to capture what the open dialogues looked like. We call this particular session Joining the Dots because ultimately that's what it was all about. There was plenty of dots on the page, but it was just about joining them together. And the long lasting piece, we did create a map of services in the area. Maps the services are constantly changing and adding to their portfolio of what they do, but we did create a basic map and we created this interactive integrated community pathway, something that the community came up with themselves. We took all of the information, everything that was shared in the open dialogues, and we kind of put it into this piece, and we got a graphic designer to come up with something. So this is actually interactive, and I can pass on the link to anybody who wants it. So these icons you can click on and it will bring you through to the different relevant supports that are on offer as well. So yeah, so that's just a bit of a run through on the North Inner City community project that we worked on and how we actually used open dialogue and really successfully, I suppose, in our opinion. If anyone wants any more information about the project itself or how to do it, they can contact me at tbyrne@recoveryacademyireland.ie and I'd be happy to share any information at all. Thanks a million.
Thanks a million, Triona. And in fairness, the evaluation itself says it worked, not just us.
Well, yeah.
And it'd be great to put that link into the chat at some
Yeah.
stage. But with no further ado, thanks for that. And people, please hold on to your thoughts about that for when we go into the overall dialogue afterwards. We're going to move on to Sabine Dick, our international partner in this webinar, for the last session before our break.
Yes, hello everybody. Just a minute. I have to share my screen too. Takes a minute. Um, mhm, mhm, mhm. Now I have to wait a minute. Let me go through here to start. So here we are. Okay, wait a minute. I just gonna introduce myself already. Am based in France, but I come originally from Germany, and I was one of the international partners in the EFCOM project, which was called Embedding an Emancipatory Educational Frameworks in Communities for People Marginalized and Excluded because of mental health and or substance misuse issues. There, the open dialogue was used as a transformative methodology, and it was underpinning the whole process. It was like an overarching concept that was used in different stages, at different places, and different times in the project. Just to throw in a few words, it was empowering, it was emancipatory, it was an adult educational process. We tried to shift also the power about mental health and recovery. When using this concept in this project, and it worked very well. So what we did, just to go on, was there were more or less 30 cycles in the project. First was the one where we developed the network, where there was an agreement on the educational and program and the evaluation framework, where there was an agreement on the communication and dissemination plan and project management plan. There already, open dialogue was introduced as a form of generating how to move on, to say it like that. In the second cycle, where the program was implemented, there were open dialogue meetings conducted. First, at the whole project, partners came together here in Marseille, and there I will talk about that a bit more later on, which things came out of that, and also at all the local sites within the different groups that went through the educational program. So looking at this, open dialogue was on the one hand used to generate knowledge and to guide the process, but also to help form community. Here, I just want to quote very briefly from the Connect Create courses of the guidelines and toolkit. Open dialogue forms trialogues were convened at each site and with a complete participatory network to establish collectively agreed transformations, particularly in relation to personal and social recovery and the broader relational developments for people in their communities. The whole aim of part of the aim of the educational process was to achieve a better social recovery. So here you see the makeup of the program. You have 3 a three-part process that includes three separate connected learning modules. So there was first the course Connect, Create, Participate. Then there was a course where people were trained at facilitation skills. And then as a third module, there was a unique module that was developed within the first course and voted on that came out. And overall, for people, it was not just a course. So dialogical practice here was used to guide the process. It was also underpinning the educational process, and it was harnessing polylogs in multiple perspectives. Within the first course, people completed a questionnaire, Chimer, which was an adaptation from Chime. And this stands as an acronym for connectedness, hope, optimism, identity, meaning, empowerment, and rights. And the rights dimension was the adaptation we had within this project here, and it proved to be magic for the people in different areas within the question of connectedness, but also identity, empowerment, but also rights. So here you can see themes on how people related to the Chimers in relation to the connectedness and rights. It showed that people were building confidence and connection through peer support and the open communication. It was cultivating respectful and safe environments for open expression and collaboration. Within the overall quantitative evaluation of the project, it showed that the parts of the program that concerned dialogues were 80% found them very useful and 20% useful. And within open questions, there were also in the questionnaires, it showed that the constructive dialogue and information sharing in a safe and supportive space, like Triona mentioned also before, was very valuable. Here you can see the themes that came out of the participatory network open dialogues we held here in Marseille, where the different project partners, course participants, and social partners, part of them came together in Marseille, where we sat together, recorded, and then later also analyzed these recordings by themes. So it was about building community and connection beyond the recovery community bubble, creation of a safe space to share, experience discomfort and grow, co-creation, new knowledge together, our knowledge. It was an emergence of my voice and self-empowerment, making a difference and paying it forward. There was evolving self-love, compassion, and taking care of myself. There was discovering diversity in how I recover, embracing collective and social recovery. Ripple effect of the recovery process on the wider community and social capital. The movement is growing legs. The simplicity of a course that builds capacity through learning and peer support. And there's ownership and belonging within a nourishing learning space. Next, I want to mention themes that came out of the different local open dialogues that were conducted at each different sites and that all went into the whole research process. So I will not read all of this now, but will read though the quotes. So add another string to the bow. Planting seeds, it takes time for them to grow. It will create a harvest for the benefit of others and like a ripple effect. People felt like part of a bigger network that was across borders. The chimer, as I said, captured people's imagination. It proved to be a central element in the educational experience, providing a framework that facilitated the connectiveness, identity, and empowerment. The identity and empowerment pieces were very powerful. By the end of the course, people were finding their voice and knowing that we're going to be respected. Paid forward and wake up, there was a desire to learn and spread the word. Lived experience, that lived experience is valuable, that there's social capital in it, that there's personal growth and empowerment through the involvement in the course possible. From the first half an hour of being in the room, there was a sense of desire to make that difference. Concerning rights and freedom and equality, there was a sense of personal and psychological safety. People felt that we're having control over the outcomes. There was freedom of opinion and expression. People were finding my voice and were feeling equal. Our experience of dealing with the system, I thought I was the only one who saw it that particular way. And then I came to this group and people agreed. So there was power, energy, not just a course, it was even a movement. People found their space, they were free to be me, they felt a sense of belonging. There was shared lived experience, they were sharing their lived experiences while maintaining autonomy. There was power sharing and autonomy. These people really cared and really wanted the best from me, and we wanted the best from each other. So that's from me. Here's webpage of the IFCOM project. And now I have to check if I was too quick.
Thank you, Sabine. If you could unshare, that'd be brilliant. And thanks for that example of, I remember swimming in that bay there when we were at one of our dialogical meetings in that picture. So that's kind of the next presentation now is going to be after a break. We're going to take a 10-minute break and come back, and Bernard is going to introduce Trialogue and lead us into an actual Trialogue where as many of you as possible will be involved in that. So I'm going to ask you to come back at, just to be pedantic, at 1:01. That gives you time for P&T if you're brave and quick. So we'll see you in 10 minutes. Thank you, folks. Still with us? The recording has started again. Just in case you missed it in the chat, if you have questions about the presentations, it'd be great to have that in the chat, and the presenters will jump in and respond to that, because when we go into the trialogue after Bernard's presentation, we particularly want to at least start the conversation around poverty and mental health. But without any further ado, I think you're with us, Bernard. You are. Do you want to take us away with the next presentation on what some people might call pure open dialogue in Trialogue?
Thanks, Liam, and good afternoon, everybody. And thanks to the first two speakers, very, very informative. And I suppose the subject that's very close to my heart. I try and use it as often as possible, open dialogue. But a bit about my own experience, I suppose, when I first came across a Trialogue meeting was actually in DCU with a course I attended there that Liam was given. It was a partnership with DCU and HSE. It was called the Mental Health Leadership Program. And I was there as a service user of the mental health services, along with a family member, not my own family member, but a family member, and then a professional that worked in the services to attend this course together for a year. Excuse me. And the first thing we done was we attended a Trialogue meeting. And I don't know, there was over 100 people at it. And it was the first experience I had at something like that, where I suppose I heard for the first time people speaking very intimately, openly, and people listening very attentively. And I won't go too much about it, but it was just, it was, I suppose the experience was somebody there was a service user, let's say, and they had an issue where they had to be forced given forced medication, and we experienced that traumatic experience. And of course, everybody's listening. But then there was also a lady there who was a nurse and was in a position where she had to be, as a professional, given that medication, not that particular chap. But what it gave us was two people's perceptive on the one thing, and a great understanding of both. And I suppose that's what I think Trialogue gives is understanding through honest, open sharing, but most of all, I suppose listening. And listening is a great tool. And so after that year, my next I suppose experience with Trialogue was following on from that. We were part of the Meet Mental Health Services, and we came back with an idea of two projects, and one was to start a Trialogue meeting in County Meath, and that we did, and it ran for 6 years. And I suppose COVID came, obviously, and it started to change the dynamics of it. We did meet once a month in a local hotel, and the HSE funded then that hotel. And the reason why it was important, I suppose, in a setting like that was that we had that time beforehand to meet. There'd be tea, biscuits, and the same to have that half an hour afterwards, which was also very important because people could carry on a conversation, say, on the subject matters or whatever, on a one-to-one basis. And those numbers generally ran around, I suppose, 20, 25. You might get 30 at the meeting. And that was a very comfortable number. My first one, of course, was a very large number. But this was a kind of good number in around this 20 to 25. And that what it was. And there's something about it that people actually adapt the sort of principle of it quite quickly. There's the usual ground rules, I suppose, that we try to introduce, or suggestions, which is one voice at a time, which is very important. So somebody's let's finish, there's no cross talking, and try and stay on point as well on the subject. And as mentioned earlier, the subjects were normally picked the week before. Obviously not for the first trialogue, we'd introduce the first subject, but after that, we try and pick it from the week before and start then the next trialogue with that. And I found that as well. We run a weekly open dialogue meeting at the moment is for people, say, with experience in dual diagnosis. And the idea of having the subject, I suppose, picked in advance is it gives people time to think about it. So before their next trialogue or open dialogue meeting, there's a little bit of thought maybe gone into it, and it sort of launches into the subject a little bit better. And so I think myself, the open dialogue trialogue I think it's the way to go. I suppose I got the bug at it from the start. I suppose I'm very enthusiastic about it, or maybe say a little bit too enthusiastic at times, but I think it can be used in an awful lot of settings. We're going to get a sample of it today. And yeah, that's basically my own experience on Trialogue. And I suppose, we want to leave it at that. Uh,
You want to
and
tell us
we
what?
go into the
Just give
dialogue.
us a little introduction about what Trialogue, how a Trialogue will unfold, because that'll be helpful for us going into the next piece as well. That'll be a nice finale
Sorry.
if you're okay with that, Bernard. That'd be brilliant.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, we've done a series of open dialogue meetings last year around dual diagnosis workshops we were given on trauma-informed communities. So basically, I suppose you'd have two facilitators, and in this case, myself and Liam. And I find as a facilitator, I try and keep out of the conversation as much as possible myself, because generally in meetings, people are normally looking to somebody at the top table or somebody who's chairing it or whatever, and kind of going through them. Whereas with Trialogue, I suppose it's a circle we tend to sit in, no top tables. So we're all there as equals, as I say, all experts by experience. And it's about having a conversation to go around the room, and it's kind of chipping in and out without kind of saying, we can all, keep our comments or, I suppose, brief enough. So it's just like having a conversation in a group. And I suppose then it's about trying to keep then the meeting on topic, because sometimes you can waver off it, and sometimes the topic might just naturally run out of steam, and we'll evolve onto another one, and we may have a couple in the sort of on standby to use, or more than likely it'll just naturally flow onto another topic between the group. And so then, yeah, so it's about keeping the conversation flowing when possible, watching for people who you think may want to come in and maybe not sort of more forthcoming than others. So you try and keep an eye out for that and invite people then to speak if they wish. It's also very important to realize that it's just important to listen. And some people don't want to speak and they're happy just listening. So everybody has the right to speak or not to speak. And that would be a very important point as well at the start. And yeah, that's about covers it, I think, Liam, on the workings of the trialogue. Really, it's an experience you have to experience,
Yeah,
and then you really know then what it is like. I mean,
yeah.
the layout is pretty straightforward, and the idea is pretty straightforward. So it's something really to experience.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah, thanks for that, Bernard. Well, that just leads us in quite nicely to this next one. And this is just a reminder. Now everybody's going to get a chance to talk, or whoever really needs to talk, either via chat and or in reality. So we'd ask two things. One, to remind you that we are recording this, just whatever you might have organizational constraints or whatever. And because this is a kind of a public webinar for the wider kind of audience, we are still recording. Um, just to know that. And the second thing is, if you, now that you are a participant rather than a listener, if you can, unless you feel compromised because of your windy situation back at home, can you please turn on your videos so that in so much as possible, we are in a presence together, and in a circle together, even if that's a kind of a hybrid circle. But we do understand that people might not have that capacity for bandwidth and for all sorts of other reasons. But in so much as possible, that'll be brilliant, so that we can kind of feel each other's presence. Just going forward now, without any further ado, myself or Bernard will look out for you raising your hand either electronically or physically if necessary, and or if you're quick off the mark, just kind of coming in there. We will try and manage in the 45 minutes left to create a space for a dialogue. So we might interrupt at some stage when somebody might be going on quite for a long time, because there's a lot of people here. We'll also try and bring in the people who are contributing into the chat. And I'm going to ask Sabine and Triona to also keep an eye on the chat, because me and Bernard will be trying to keep an eye on the three screens and trying to bring people in as much as possible. I'm going to launch the topic of conversation just into the melting pot. We'd like you to talk to each other, to us all together, about the relationship between poverty and mental health challenges uh, across this island of Ireland.
Yeah.
Johnny?
Uh, well, I'm a user with quite a lot of experience, so I've been struggling with anxiety for a number of years. Uh, and I'm really interested in the dynamics of, I'm not quite sure what Trialogue is, but I'll just tell you a story. I have been involved in representing the user sector for a number of years. And about 3 or 4 years ago, I was asked to join a group in Lisburn which was addressing health inequalities. And we had a group of maybe 12 or 15 or 20 people representing each area where health inequalities had an impact: police, domestic violence, housing, health, poverty, all sorts of things. And I went in there thinking I knew a little bit about health inequalities, but I realized I didn't know very much. And it was quite the most profound lessons that I have ever learned. I had about 12 sessions, where each session was out of a particular aspect. And it struck me that half of the population, most of the population, even right through some of the professionals, don't really understand health inequalities. And it was stories that I heard, and I've heard lots of stories with the local Healthy Living Alliance here. And I've met a number of people and I've chatted to them. And you then start to get a real grasp of what it is we're talking about. And if we don't know what we're talking about, it's very hard to solve it properly. I'm not suggesting people around this at this table don't recognize that, but I do think it's a huge challenge, and that anybody who's going to try and address this, no matter how well-meaning they are, they have to have a really good understanding of what we're talking about. And I think that's a bit of a problem.
All right, thanks. Mags, you were coming in there?
Yeah, the thing that came up for me, I think growing up as a woman in the context of kind of political violence here, I work at a service for women who've been impacted by that and interface with the justice system themselves. And, substance use, complex trauma, all those kind of issues come into play. But also as someone who's grown up probably in one of the areas most impacted by the political violence here, you see that those health inequalities still exist, and it just made me realise how much our system here in the North is so ill-informed in terms of health inequalities and in terms of, and I see it very, very much, especially with women as well, and the fact that those kind of specific issues for groups who are more marginalised, whether it's women, whether it's the LGBT community here, whether it's people who have come as newcomers, to here for refuge, seeking refuge and asylum. Those conversations we're not even starting to have those. Definitely not. We are in the community services, very much so, but within statutory services, and that's a massive frustration for service users and, for us using services, for families using services, but also within the community sector, it's a massive frustration here in the North. Thanks for listening.
Cheers, Max. Anybody else responding to that or kind of along that same line want to come in?
Yeah, I can speak, Liam.
Okay.
I didn't sleep last night. I'm getting blown over here on Dublin North Bay, so a bit tired. The brain isn't working great. Yeah, I think there's a massive disconnect really between like political stuff, social stuff, and our environment to what is going on for a person. And I think the disconnect is sometimes in the delivery of the services and what we deliver and what approach we deliver, and how the dots are never joined across all these social issues that people have. And I grew up in poverty and I have lived experience of distress, and I always thought it was a disorder and something that was wrong inside of me. And I started to put like the pieces together that it was environmental stuff that was happening. But as I move through my journey now, I've widened my lens even further to see the impacts of political and social like environments and issues on my life and the community I had. And I would say poverty was a big impact on me and my mental health. And services never really acknowledge that and they don't see that. And I think even a person attending a service doesn't see that. You know, I'm in my 40s now and it's taken me 30 years to see those links. And I'm now a service provider. And I think as a service provider, if we can plant seeds to people that there is a wider lens on, you know, the personal recovery, that it isn't just a personal responsibility, that there is social recovery and there's a wider piece to that. Um, but as I said, it's taken me 30 years to see the link to poverty and my mental health. So I think it's important to have these conversations and hopefully we can plant seeds into other people that are still looking for the answers and thinking that it's within them that the problem lies. So yeah.
Cheers for that, Claire.
Okay.
Anybody, we have Fiona and then Valerie.
Hi, how are you, Fiona? I think sometimes we're afraid even to use the word poverty, and we talk about cost of living and we talking about people taking responsibility for their own lifestyles. And really, we don't have poverty strategies. We don't even have the word used by governments, by services. People have a fear around that, and there has to be a huge amount of accountability about why people live in poverty. And a bit like what Kira just said there in terms of the disconnection between, I mean, it impacts everything. It impacts every level of our health and how we function within our communities. And I would like to see people starting to use that language and place it where it needs to be placed. Thanks.
Thanks, Fiona.
Cheers, Fiona. And Valerie, you were coming in there.
Yeah. No, just that I used to be a retail manager up until about 4 years ago. We were very, very accountable for every square foot density and had to be very real about what it meant in terms of profitability and utility of space. I came in then into the health and social services, and quite a daunting difference, obviously learning the landscape, etc. I'm a family advocate for those who support someone with a serious mental illness. So we come across, and really the longevity relationship that we have with service users and families is quite sustained across all teams and different areas of services. And it's simply to say, the disconnect is quite incredible when you're coming from something so articulate that you have to be so resolute in how you present into an atmosphere and an environment where there's no articulation of how, to collaboratively work together for a recovery that is positive. And I can only see it getting, even in the 4 years that I'm in the services, even such a chasm. Normally for dual diagnosis, you have to treat the abuse of drugs or alcohol before you treat the mental health. And psychology services up here in our trust, there's no expectation from a service user to even, come alongside psychology. So you can't get to the root. And if you double down on that and compound that with the poverty aspect, where everybody's expected to go private these days, and actually it's recommended upon appointments that, well, if we've 3 years, 4 years waiting list, we recommend you go private. Those that are not having any savings, let alone being able to accommodate that, is, where is the hope? Where is this route of where we can collaboratively work together? Community services are just getting less and less support financially into what they do and how they serve. And so the chasm is growing. It shocks me. It shocks me that, I know walking on with families with schizophrenia, bipolar, etc. And when you have compounded issues like poverty, you don't get the mental clarity to sit down and look at the root causes. And you're shoved into services that are not looking at the depth of issues that they're facing collaboratively across different teams. I don't know what the answer is. I just see the variances in how people receive and how the less and less hope they have for that positive outcome that exists. So a lot of work in forums like this, absolutely. We need more and more of them in the North. So, more positivity to you. I hope we get some more like this up here.
Thanks, Valerie. And just before we come to Triona, I'm just aware, thanks, Derek, for your contribution in the chat there about the impact of psychiatrization on people's ability to save, and even having more of a negative impact on poverty because of the lack of skills to be able to engage with kind of basic economy. Feel free to read that edition there, folks. I know, Triona, you're looking to come in there as well.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna kind of talk about working in the Northeast Inner City. So I come from poverty myself, but a council estate in the suburbs. So even though there was, quite a lot of like disruption and upheaval and violence and things like that, a lot of friends who would have went into addiction over the years, working in the Northeast Inner City, where it just seems to be homelessness is on the rise, open drug dealing, drug taking is everywhere. I'm 2 years now working in it and walking the streets of it, and I've noticed in my own self, that I'm kind of in it when I'm walking around, I'm in a constant state of that fight or flight. You just have to be. And the people that we work with, we're kind of, trying to create spaces for people to thrive in their recovery through education, sports, our recovery cafe, just being a space for people to come to. I'm very, very aware that the people who live in the community come to those spaces, but when they walk back out the door, they are back into that state of fight or flight. They react to things. I've noticed even myself, like I have to be careful with how I maybe deliver certain things because they're so used to being on the defense as well. And I just ask myself, like, how do they find kind of that inner peace and contentment that's going to allow them to recover well? It seems to be constantly trying to like protect themselves from the environmental factors. And I just find it so, it's a heavily funded area and like there are so many services, but the environmental piece is just so huge. The violence, the way they like I'll give an example. I was walking from my place of work to the local shop the other day, and it was peak morning traffic, I think probably about 9:30. Kids were kind of on their way to school as well. And there was a young guy being searched by the police on the street, and he had to pull down his trousers to be searched. And I just remember thinking, this can't be like real life that this is happening on a main street in Dublin City. But it is. And what it did to me was it created a rage inside me. I would imagine it's normalized for the people who live in the area, which is another problem in itself. But yeah, I think like there needs to be more recognition for how much it's the environmental factors that impact on people's mental health. And then in an area where, substance use is just completely normalized as a way of coping, then, people are going to enter into that journey, unfortunately. So yeah, that's my piece.
Thanks, Triona. Resonate with anybody else's thoughts or experiences or what they wanted to contribute?
Hi, Liam.
Hi, yeah. Hi, Pastor Ross.
How are you? I suppose following from what Triona said, I live in the inner city for the last 20 years nearly, and I also work in the Dublin North Inner City. And I think in Christmas of 2023, a bit like Trina's experience, it was during Christmas time and I was walking and so it's just the heaviness in the air, living here. Those people obviously squatting across the street, and this was people going on in their methadone clinic just after Christmas, and just people homeless in the area. And I just felt this must have an impact on us to live in a place where there's layers and layers of trauma, traumatic experiences, both individual, but I think very often we focus on the individual trauma. So as frontline worker, we try our best, and I think services are really trying their best with very limited resources to assist people, facilitate change, empower people. So I think on an individual basis, we're doing it quite well, but I think there's a bigger issue which obviously open dialogue is really helpful, which is the community trauma itself. And I think sometimes you have people who live in those areas, like myself. We just think it's easier to think of the individual trauma because it's easier to respond to. However, we need to deal and address the community trauma. If not, yes, we can fix, quick fix individual trauma by, accessing services, by getting the right support, by connecting with other people. But there's a much bigger issue. And I think in Dublin 1, which is a place which is very close to my heart, I love living here. I wouldn't live anywhere else. I have children who live here, and I'm kind of thinking, the area, there's money pumped into this area in doing the new railings in Montjoy Square, in, very superficial things, but the core root of the issue is still, it's addressed in a very patchy way. There's always new initiative who go on for 6 months there, 6 months there. So there's loads of new initiative, but the problem is things are not sustained and they are not maintained. So we're back to square one. I was part of Trina's, Trina did an amazing work on the NEIC dual diagnosis initiative. It was brilliant. But then when Trina left and Liam left, I think then the momentum kind of left. And we were back in our silos, working individually, again, trying our best. There's a massive level of burnout. I think a lot of people are feeling there's a kind of movement, I think, at the moment from community workers and frontline workers who are all feeling at a loss and who are feeling a bit disheartened. And we're in that kind of vacuum a bit where we want to do something, we want to be part of the community, but we need leaders. It's like nearly we need those leaders, even if we don't want a top table thing. You need someone to lead it. So this is me ranting for 2 seconds. I thought I wouldn't talk because my connection is really poor, but I thought, why not? I'll take the risk. So thank you, guys.
Thank you, Pastor Rose. We heard
Thanks.
you loud and clear.
Thank you.
We have Anne coming in there and then Aaron.
Yeah, hi, thank you, and hello, everybody. I'm from the North. I was a mental health nurse here in the North for 38 years, and I suppose what I want to say is the last 8 to 10 years of my career were spent embracing recovery, and I worked as a recovery coordinator in a trust in Northern Ireland, but I had to leave. I had to leave my post and I had to get out because all of the efforts, it was like fighting against, it was like crawling up a wall of treacle, because every time I felt that we were making progress in the world of co-production, which is what this open dialogue and Trialogue, that's the sense I get from it, but I think it's a bit deeper and it's a bit more real and more connected and better communication. But I really felt that my efforts to do all of that work were disregarded. They ticked a box, but really there was no investment, no financial investment, no human investment, no embracing of people with lived experience. So I felt I was doing all of that on my own. And whilst this is not a place to offload all of that, I had to get away from statutory services because I couldn't do it anymore. And I think that is really, really sad. It's a very poor indictment on statutory funded services. Most of my very productive and progressive work was done with people with lived experience, carers and families, and the non-statutory sector, our third sector, community and voluntary organisations, where we were able to sit round tables and do that work and make things really possible and create hope. But unfortunately, that kept being put down and wasn't recognised. We ended up becoming, those of us who were doing this work, ended up becoming damaged, almost like the violence that is perpetrated towards our patients and service users in services. That same violence was perpetrated upon the staff who were trying to make changes. So I had to get out to get away from it. And I still look in and think, are these simple strategies and these things that are very doable that we can talk about, why are they not being implemented? Good leadership is important, but I see good leadership also being put down and disregarded also. So I wonder, I don't have answers, and I wish I did, and I wish I could still do what I used to do, but it's no longer possible to work in a system that continues to be in many ways violent towards everybody that's in that system. So I struggle with it and I wish I had answers. You know, Recovery College is where I started doing all of that work. And it was fabulous. But now when I look into where I used to work, none of that work is happening. It's like one of the previous speakers talked about, when people leave and go, that momentum changes and everything gets diluted, and the core of why we are there is no longer recognized. So I struggle to understand why that happens when there's so many people, for instance, on this screen with fabulous ideas and great outcomes, and the work that has been done is fabulous, and it's great to hear about that. I would love to see how that could grow and we could become better at it.
Thanks for that, Anne. I'm just reminded that your experience has been kind of replicated in the South, really. I think it's I think it's a statutory thing within so-called developed worlds. And I know the Community Development Mental Health Network, who are kind of the co-facilitators of this VEEP project. The reason we formed our network was that the statutory system is not fit for purpose, and the community needs to stand up and fight for the community and fight for the people, with the hope that the statutory service would just implode because it's not fit for purpose. I've got Aaron, you've been hanging in there for a minute. I'll hand over to you.
Yeah, there's a couple of things kind of coming to mind as I'm listening to people, and different points are coming. I suppose I've worked in services for a long time, managing services, and I know at the moment the kind of buzzword is trauma informed. I suppose as a manager, part of my role would have been trying to bring these models into the system. But it's always come up for me a question around, is this just a fancy way that services can say we're being acknowledging of trauma informed, and what does it actually do, I suppose. And one of the examples of that for me that really kind of always came up was around language. And we used to always have an issue I worked in a homeless service for families. It was emergency accommodation.
Yeah, I'll have it then.
And one of the issues that used to often commonly come up was how their people are speaking to me. This is what I used to hear from the staff. How service users are speaking to me is not okay, and we shouldn't be allowing people speak to us in this way. And I could see how it became a barrier in some sort of way, rather than acknowledging that people are frustrated by the situation they're in, or their natural language is to, use the F word, or to use different language, and to not get kind of caught up by that. And it was one example for me around, I'd go back and I'd be kind of speaking we'd have these reviews of like risk kind of things, and I'd be saying, look, to senior managers, well, like if we're really being trauma informed, like why do we need to be getting so hung up that Johnny comes in and decides that he's going to have a rant at me and tell me fuck this, fuck that, blah blah blah. Why do I have to get so caught up in what he's saying or how he's presenting to me? Is it not being trauma informed to just acknowledge and say, I can see that you're frustrated, and this is fine, or using the language that people are using. Like we have all these policies and procedures, and they're so highfalutin in terms of language, and how is that in any way kind of being trauma informed? Are our policies being looked at? Are we trying to bring some kind of reality of the service users that we're working to into the policies that we kind of have as an organization, and our approach to things? And another thing that kind of crossed my mind as well was we had a huge difficulty for supporting parents who felt that their children had kind of behavioral difficulties, and they weren't being supported by schools, and so we got a load of funding where a lot of these children were on waiting lists to get assessed by psychology. So we got a load of funding, and where we were able to fund a number of private places, which obviously they couldn't afford themselves. And actually, when they got assessed, 60% of those children that we were able to pay came back from psychology reports saying that actually this was an environmental issue. This wasn't an issue to do with ADHD or any of those kind of diagnoses. And then when we looked to try and get support for those children, it was like, well, there's nothing we can do. They need to have a diagnosis in order for us to be able to support them, you know. And really it was poverty. It was down to the issues of they're all living in one room, or you know they're disconnected from their communities because they've been put into kind of hostels. Um, and for me, on a personal level, I had my own experience of mental health difficulties. I've grown up in poverty myself, you know. Uh, and I was so lucky in some sort of way that I didn't get caught up in that system. And everybody that used to sit in front of me, that's what I used to think, you know. I was very lucky that I met places like recovery colleges, that I met people like the people that are on these calls that are looking to try and do things in a different way, you know, which shifted for me personally my own kind of recovery, and brought me to a place where I didn't get caught up, or I wasn't as reliant on these systems that I see just continually re-traumatize people over and over and over again. And like Anne was saying, that the staff who are very motivated, no more than myself, I'm now in a role that has moved away from managing services because the burnout sets in, your own tolerance of fighting the system, you know, is not there anymore. And similar to you, Anne, how do you shift that? I don't know, or how does that become different within those systems? I'm not really sure. But yeah, there were just a couple of things that were coming to mind for me.
Thanks, Aaron. At this stage, we usually ask, is there anybody who's really wanted to say something? This is your chance to come in now, get it off and get it in there. Grania.
Yeah, sorry. I was just going to text it. Here we go. I was texting a big essay. I used to work in homeless services for a number of years, and now I work in as a tenancy support worker for people with mental health difficulties for housing. So I guess the frustration or the burnout that people are talking about, I kind of needed to work on the other side just to see the difference and just to see I knew the difference, but it's lovely to see people living in their own homes who have come from homeless services or poverty. It's not to say that they're not still exposed to poverty. I guess the trialogue and the open dialogue, they're not new things to me, and I guess sometimes I get frustrated with that we're still talking about them as ideas. Like it would be great to see things move faster. That's probably my impatience as well, but I guess any of these discussions just show the amount of good work that is happening with people, or the amount of goodwill that's going on, which is just nice to see, because sometimes, like we're saying, that silo piece, we just work and we stick with our own frustrations, but it's nice to see that there's other things shifting or moving as well. That's me. Thanks.
Thanks, Grania.
Ross.
Yeah, for me, my biggest kind of thought about is the disconnect between the actual work that's kind of going on within the bubble of the mental health service. Now, specifically speaking of the North here, I'm involved as a service user with the establishment of the Regional Mental Health Service, which is going on now, and we're in the middle of a 10-year mental health strategy. That if you go out and look at anyone working on the front lines of actual mental health work, they don't know that this is actually going on. They don't know that there is this conversion to the Regional Mental Health Service going on. So I want to know how we can help really inform people, especially those who are living in poverty, because I've come from a position of privilege my whole life, so I haven't experienced that, but I do live around it, and I know a lot about it, and I know we talk about getting delivering this information out there, and we're looking at comm strategies and things like that. People are talking about putting out e-zines and email lists and things like that, and I'm sitting there thinking, this isn't going to reach the right people. Like, they're not going to be checking that kind of thing. People who are single parent mom working 2 jobs, having to look after her kids isn't, checking our emails for an e-zine from the Regional Mental Health Service to get the latest update. So it's what has worked in these areas of poverty to really let people know, again, of the services that are around them that are available. Because again, as people have said before, there's a lot of fantastic services out there. A lot of charities that are out there on the front line putting out fires, but people don't know about them. And it's how do we proactively go out and let people know what is actually available and what's going on, and what's the simplest way to do that makes it viable for these people who are surviving, like their everyday is just survival. How do we reach out to them?
Thanks for that, Ross. I'm just aware as well, Clodagh has a couple of key points in there in the chat if people want to go in there and also feel the need to respond to it. Anybody else coming in there?
Liam, I think Gillian has her hand raised.
Gillian, sorry, thanks.
That's okay. I just stuck it up at the last minute. I tried to be quiet, but this is a forum for not doing that, I suppose. I was really struck by the points around communication, and I suppose I just think that in all of what we do, we sometimes lose sight of the person. And people have talked about being aware of the environment and, the differences in language and all of that, I absolutely agree with. But sometimes if you just take a minute and just think about what that person's life's like and give them the space and the time to be able to explore what's going on for them and their life circumstances. And then thinking about how together we can look at what support might look like and at the pace and at the within the context of their life and at their pace and at their direction. And I think we just don't do that. I just don't think we don't systematically do that. And I think what happens is, you get people who take that approach, and we've heard from a lot of them today, and then funding ends, or people move on, or they get burnt out, or they don't work in a structure and a system that doesn't support them. But unless we're taking the time and the space to actually allow people to tell us what their life's like. And some of us may have empathy with that. Some of us may have lived experience that aligns with that, but some of us don't. And we need to allow people to be experts in their own lives and to share that and allow us to be able to collaboratively take that journey, allow us to have permission to take that journey with them, to be able to afford them the right to recovery. And I just don't think it's systematically done. That was it.
Thanks a million for that, Gillian. Jim Walsh.
Yeah, can I see myself there? Can't see himself anyway. Yeah, it's just something that I've kind of been thinking about for quite a while now, and this isn't to take away from the whole impact of poverty and all the rest, but it also we need to think about a couple of things. One is, why is mental health on the rise? Mental health issues, challenges. And I think it might be some of it beyond the materialism. So, for instance, there's a lot of inequity. So therefore, we need to be thinking about who holds the money, who holds the power. And actually, interestingly, I heard piece of research done fairly recently where if you're making anything beyond, and I know this sounds extraordinary, 50 million, no matter how much more money you get, doesn't make you any more happier. So I'm looking in the direction of spiritualism, for instance, and connection, that it always doesn't land with materialism and accruing things, that there's something deeper. And I think there's a yearning in our society for something new, for looking something beyond the materialism, and to think that all solutions to people's lives lie in money and things. Now, that's not to take away from the whole issue of poverty, because that seems to be the biggest cause of this. But there's also something beyond that. I think that we need to really seriously look at something that brings humanity back together again, in some sense. I don't know what spiritualism is. I've been thinking about it, trying to write about it, trying to ponder on it. Certainly don't want to go around the route of institutional religion, but there's something beyond this as the solutions to people's lives and bringing people together. But we still need to look at the whole idea of that there's a small number of people in the world, for instance, who hold so much power and money and influence. And that needs to be looked at as well as a new system. But I also think there's something spiritually missing from our lives and from a human kind of connection that we need to really address and look at. When people's in distress, even people with money are still in distress. So therefore, there's something missing there, and I think people are more and more become socially isolated than ever before. And that's one of the things. And the thing which I'm kind of looking at as well, kind of thinking about is, for instance, mindfulness is a great practice, I think. But we teach it in school, and this is just the world we live in. So you teach it in school, you do a couple of sessions with children, and I think that's great. And what do? They go home again, they get on to their technologies, they do all of these things which disconnect them again. They don't practice it because it's not part of our culture. We have a different culture which works against those kind of practices. We really need to think of that bigger picture, I think. What connects us, what brings us together, what puts us in a place, how do we connect with our environment? And what I mean by that is the natural environment as well. So all of that is missing, I think, as well as kind of looking at poverty and the kind of materialism which is involved in that. And I think we need to seriously look at that, but change the system also, as I say, where the richest just don't become more powerful and affecting their lives as well. So anyway, I've maybe a bit more to say on that, but and again, I'll just reiterate, I'm not quite sure what spiritualism is in this context, but I think we seriously need to look at it. Okay, yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Jim.
Cheers, Jim. You've triggered a human rights trend on the chat as well, if people want to dip into that. And Joanne, you're coming in there.
I'm a bit slow off the mark then, because that's just what it did spark in my head. It reminded me of what Sabine said earlier on in her presentation about human rights and some of the other contributions that people have made, and rights being taken away. And I think what Jim is talking to is that wider piece, so we know about people's social rights and their health rights, and why it's so important that our systems respect those and work with people on those. But I think there's bigger rights being taken away from people: democratic rights and the right to have a basic income. So but people have already caught that trend on the human rights, not that we would want to forget it.
Cheers, Joanne. So we tend to have some themes emerging here. I don't know if anybody else wants to jump in and how they feel the themes is going. There's kind of this kind of crossover between the experience of service provision and the experience of service use. Poverty has moved into also kind of trauma, environment, human rights. We've talked, vicarious trauma seems to have a really clear message there. Do we have a brand of trauma-informed care, but without supporting people using the services and the people providing the services, then that is just a word, an abused word, rather than an active ingredient of care. What else? They're kind of the themes that are kind of coming out for me. And then it is more than just materialism, I think, has come out there. And then there's a little bit of, okay, we can talk about it, which is nice, but how are we going to actually change it? There are the themes that are coming out for me. Anybody want to jump in there for almost the last voice? Joanne?
You're on mute there, Joanne.
You're on mute, Joanne.
Doing the hand raise and the mute at the same time now is challenging, but the thing that was coming out for me as Pasco was talking and the colleague beforehand was around those environmental impacts and Aaron, given the statistic there of the 60% of the kids, their issues were environmental, the places that they were living in and the communities that they were walking around in, and that feeling of survival. And what really strikes me about this method of open dialogue and, good community development awareness raising is that there is maybe a space just to look at this slightly differently, and maybe start the conversation around mental health and poverty in that environmental and community setting using the open dialogue method. So I think that's a theme as well to pick up on.
Thanks, Joanne. Triona,
Sure.
and then Jim.
I know I've spoken already, so I'm conscious that I don't want to take up too much time, but just something that's like I can see some intertwining between some of the teams here around the money management piece and the spirituality piece as well. So I'm thinking like I come from an area myself that would have been there'd be a lot of poverty. And I heard something recently that kind of really stuck with me. And it was wealthy people plan for the future, and the poorer people plan for Saturday night. So, a lot of people can look from the outside and see, well, these people who are living in these impoverished areas have the best of the gear. And that is true. But it's because there's an importance and a self-worth is put on how you look in these areas. So they will maybe not have a pot to what in, but they will make sure they look the part, because that's where I suppose maybe their confidence, that's where they get their confidence, is by walking out the door and having, the best of clothes. Deep down, there's a part that I would imagine they're not comfortable with themselves, or they haven't found themselves. Their identity is mixed up in this. And I see that with a lot of the people we're working with now in recovery. A lot of their value is put on the external and how they look. So, it can look like, and we've already always heard like benefits ground or all that sort of kind of narrative. Well, they have the money to buy the best of clothes and the best of presents for their kids. That's all an external thing. So I don't know how it would have to start from children, really small ages, and trying to put more of an importance on who you are as a person and your identity and your values and things like that. But when a whole community, bases their values upon, certain brands, certain labels, it just means their money management gets wrapped up in how they look and the external piece. So it's just something I've always kind of mulled over, is like there are loads of services on offer, and they probably could spend money on other things that maybe would benefit their health. But like, you have to really look at, this is years. Like, I mean, I grew up in the 90s and it was definitely all about labels back then. So, and it's more so. And then you've also got now aesthetics playing a part. So beauty standards as well. So you will see a lot of that in areas that are suffering from poverty, that people will, this beauty, this level of beauty that needs to be, like, the standard is so high. Young girls getting into that as well, which is expensive and costly, but that's where they place their self-worth, is on that external. So
Thanks,
ultimately it ends in mental health and issues around that. But yeah, that's just my
thanks, Triona. Just hold for a second, Jim, just to say that we will capture the chat as well, because there's some wonderful stuff happening in that chat. There's kind of a parallel and a dialogue that's linking into the other dialogue. Just before you come in, Jim, I'm just wondering, is there anybody who hasn't spoken who would like to just get their R in, because we're just about to finish? It'd be great if you really didn't leave
Well,
thinking, oh, I'd love to have said that.
yeah, I'd like to say something before we do finish, but I can let Jim go first if he wants, or
No, work
I mean,
away,
okay, yeah.
Bernard.
I know we're talking about poverty and mental health, but you see, there's also like mental health in sort of the more affluent society as well. It's just that it's different. It's not seen in the same way. And and it's dressed up differently and so on, so it just looks different. And I remember there's an old saying once, sort of the someone who's mad or someone who's eccentric. It's just that the eccentric has money, so it's sort of, so maybe it does go across the whole community, mental health, though except it does look a lot different in different societies. Yeah.
And it looks like, Sabine, you're going to have the last word before I hand back to Joanne.
Super. I just want to say thank you for having me being part of this here. And I was just, when listening to all of you, realizing that I think you can detach this discussion from any national context we're in, pretty much. I think it's not only an Irish discussion we're having here, just for me here. Thank you.
That's a really interesting finale, Sabina. This is a global thing, and it's not just here. Well, I hope, thank you everybody for your participation, and for those of you who've stayed with us for the 2 hours, really, really grateful for that. And we hope that this sample that we've offered here might give you food for thought for continually linking in with VEEP and the next stage of this North-South initiative, which is funded to continue with a lot of dialogue and hopefully transformation. But I'm going to hand over to Joanne, maybe to just close the webinar, if you don't mind, Joanne.
Thank you very much, Liam and Brendan and Sabine and Triona, for setting off this wonderful conversation, and thanks to everybody for sharing their thoughts and their experience, both in the dialogue and on the chat. It's really, really powerful. This is the last of our webinars, but it is certainly not the last of the work of VEEP, and we will be packaging this all up, the chat, the references, the recorded session, and we'll be getting them out to you, and we'll be in touch with next steps. So thanks again for your participation. I hope you all have a great weekend.